Seriously, you showed up wearing that? Mara's voice sliced through the restaurant noise, sharp and bright enough to turn a few nearby heads. She shoved her chair back so hard the silverware rattled, then laughed. A big, performative sound meant for the whole room, not just the man across from her. "I can't do this," she announced, half to him, half to the audience she just created. "I'm not sitting here pretending this is a date with a maintenance guy." She grabbed her purse, heels striking the marble like a gavel, and walked away, still laughing, the sound bouncing off glass and polished stone. Marcus Ward didn't move. The black single dad sat there for a beat, steady, breathing once, deep, controlled, drawing air from a place inside him that had carried him through nights far worse than this. He let the moment pass over him instead of through him, like wind against armor that had been tested before. The room watched. Some people tried to pretend they weren't. Others stared openly. But he didn't chase her. He didn't call out. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out enough cash to cover the untouched drinks and the tip, and laid the bills neatly on the table. His hands didn't shake. His face didn't twist with anger or humiliation. He just looked calm. The kind of calm that doesn't come from indifference, but from discipline. Before long, the entire building would see that same composure again, for a completely different reason. And when Mara's father saw him in action, when he understood exactly who this maintenance guy really was, he would do something no one in that atrium would ever forget. He would salute him, and the silence that followed would be louder than any laughter. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me down in the comments. Because this isn't just a story about a bad date. It's about what happens when a black single dad's quiet dignity collides head-on with someone else's arrogance and flips the whole room. Marcus slid the money toward the edge of the table, stood up, and walked out. No dramatic exit, no sharp retorts. Just the unhurried movements of a man who knew exactly who he was, even when everyone else in the room chose to see only a uniform. Humiliation tried to press against him, but it didn't get far. There was too much discipline layered over his nerves, too much training baked into his bones. He stepped into the cool evening air outside the Ellington Grand, her laughter still echoing faintly in the back of his mind. He refused to let it settle. He'd had harder days, darker moments, nights where the wrong move meant more than an embarrassing story. It meant someone didn't make it home. Compared to that, this was noise. On the walk back to his apartment, he went to the same thought he always returned to when the world tried to cut at him: Amara. His 8-year-old daughter had bounced around the kitchen that afternoon, drawing little stars around the words she'd written in crooked letters on a scrap of paper. "Good luck, Dad." She'd taped it to the fridge like it was a promise the universe had no choice but to keep. She'd grinned so hard her cheeks hurt. Remembering that now made the sting sharper, and also gave it direction. He wasn't working double shifts and swallowing cheap insults for strangers. He was doing it for her, for the small hand that slipped into his every morning, for the soft little voice that asked him to braid her hair before school. He reached their building, an old brick place, with hall lights that flickered and an elevator that made suspicious noises 3 times a week. As soon as he opened their door, warmth met him. Crayon drawings on the walls, the faint smell of reheated soup, the hum of a life that revolved around a child who thought her dad could fix anything. Amara was on the floor with markers scattered around her, curls a little wild, deep brown skin glowing under the yellow kitchen light. Her face lit up when she saw him. "You're back," she said, scrambling up. "How was it?" Marcus pulled a smile onto his face, the shield every loving parent learns to wear when they want to keep the world's sharp edges from cutting their kid. "It was okay," he said lightly. Her head tilted. Innocent curiosity. No suspicion. To tell her the truth would be to invite the world's cruelty right into this small, carefully guarded space. So he edited, softened, left out the part where someone laughed loud enough for strangers to enjoy it. She nodded, accepting his version of the night without question, and wrapped her arms around his waist. That simple hug shrank the embarrassment until it was something he could fold up and tuck away instead of something that tried to own him. Later, after she was in bed and the apartment had gone quiet, He stood in the tiny kitchen with his hands braced on the counter. The restaurant, the laughter, the looks, none of it weighed as much as the way Amara had looked at him when he'd walked through the door. If this was the cost of a life that let him pick her up from school, show up to her art night, be home for nightmares and science projects, he'd pay it. Every time. Tenfold. Still, something ached under his ribs, not because she had laughed at him, but because Amara's good luck drawing had been answered with that. Maybe it had been foolish to say yes to a blind date set up by a coworker, maybe not. Either way, the disciplined part of him, the part that had been shaped in places far away from polished mall floors, reminded him this was just a moment, not a verdict. Later, sitting on the worn sofa, he ran a hand over his close-cropped coils and replayed the scene in fragments. Her pointing at his Navy maintenance uniform like it was a joke, the silence that followed, the smug twist of her mouth. He let the memory play out, then exhaled it like smoke. Tomorrow would still come. There would still be vents to fix, sensors to check, a daughter to wake up and walk to school. There would still be a life to build with pieces most people didn't bother to notice. He had no idea that tomorrow would drag him right back into the same building, into the same restaurant with the same woman watching. He had no idea that a crisis was already forming in the bones of the Ellington Grand, one that no manager, no executive, no wealthy client would know how to handle. He had no idea that when it hit, he'd be the only one calm enough, trained enough, and experienced enough to see the pattern forming behind the polished glass. And he definitely didn't expect that the man Mara respected most in the world, her father, would see him in the middle of that chaos and recognize exactly what he was. Tonight had been humiliation. Tomorrow would be revelation. When morning came, nothing about it felt extraordinary. Marcus woke before dawn, body obeying routines that had been drilled into him years ago. The apartment was quiet, fridge humming, plumbing ticking somewhere in the wall, the soft, slow rhythm of Amara's breathing coming from her room. He sat up and let last night's dust settle in his head, slow and quiet. Then he got moving. He packed her lunch with practiced hands. The "Good luck, Dad" drawing still clung to the fridge, stars pressed around the words. He touched the corner lightly, grounding himself in the reason he did all of this. Mara's laughter tried to crowd in. He pushed it aside and replaced it with Amara's hug. He wasn't defined by the mockery of someone who'd never asked a single question about his life. He was defined by the child who thought the building only worked because her dad did. Amara shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, dark curls everywhere, brown skin still warm from sleep. Her face brightened the second she saw him. "Morning," she mumbled, and padded over to wrap her arms around his waist like she had the night before. That simple, instinctive insistence on closeness felt like armor. He hugged her back, steady. They walked to school together along the cracked sidewalk, her small hands swinging from his. She told him about an art project, a classmate with a glittery backpack, a butterfly she was determined to catch. Marcus answered in the quiet, attentive way that made kids feel like the world paused for them. After she ran inside, ponytail bouncing, he lingered for a moment, watching through the fence. Then he turned towards the Ellington Grand. By the time he clipped his tools onto his belt and stepped into the mall's service corridors, the building was already humming. On the outside, it was all glass and marble. Underneath, it was pipes, wires, vents, sensors, systems he knew better than almost anyone. The executives strutted through lobbies like they owned it. Marcus knew the truth. The building ran because people like him kept it breathing. A few restaurant staff prepping for the lunch rush recognized him, not as Marcus, not as Amara's dad, but as the guy who'd been laughed at last night. Their looks hovered somewhere between sympathy and curiosity. He nodded politely and kept walking. He had work. Pride didn't unclog drains or stabilize sensors. In the maintenance office, his supervisor looked up from a clipboard. "Morning, Ward," Brewster said, voice rough from too much coffee and not enough sleep. "We've got kids coming in for that art thing today. Expect chaos." Marcus nodded, taking his assignment sheet. The children's art event would bring noise and spills and more traffic than usual. He didn't mind. It meant Amara would be there later. She'd insisted he bring her after school so she could paint something for the universe. He didn't know what that meant exactly, but if it mattered to her, it mattered to him. By midday, the mall buzzed. Marcus worked the upper levels, checking vents and running diagnostics on security sensors, a job that wasn't technically his, but one he'd learned out of necessity. He knew these systems better than some outside contractors. He never corrected anyone about that. Staying invisible was simpler. As he passed a partially open conference room, voices drifted out. Several of Mara's colleagues were clearly rehashing the blind date. "She showed up, and he was in an actual maintenance uniform," one voice said, amused. "I thought she was joking when she texted us." Mara's laugh followed. "I swear, I thought someone was pranking me." "Like, really? A date with a maintenance guy?" Someone muttered, "Yikes!" Marcus paused just long enough to let the sting land. Then he kept moving. Their laughter didn't scare him. The idea of Amara hearing something like that one day, that was what pressed harder. He reached the children's art area, where staff were setting out paint trays and stacks of paper. He adjusted the vents above so the airflow wouldn't blow artwork off the tables. Little details no one ever noticed, unless they went wrong. On the staff counter, a small framed photo caught his eye, a picture of him holding Amara at a previous event. Both of them smiling, her small arms wrapped around his neck. He hadn't known anyone had taken it, let alone printed it. The sight softened something in him. He wasn't invisible to everyone. Not long after, he headed into a service corridor behind the luxury restaurant. A faint, irregular beep echoed from a smoke sensor. Most people would have ignored it as background noise. Marcus didn't. He stopped, listened. The pattern was off. Not a full alarm. Not nothing. He made a mental note to come back after his current round. He had no idea that this exact sensor would soon be the start of everything. Back in the atrium, the children's event kicked off, filling the space with messy, joyful chaos. Paint everywhere, glitter where glitter should never be. The kind of noise that made the building feel alive. Marcus checked the vents again, watching from the edge as kids scrambled from table to table. He pictured Amara there soon, eyes wide, no trace of the world's harshness in them yet. He hoped the day would stay ordinary. Simplicity, though, was rarely a luxury for him. He slipped back into the service corridor. That irregular beep was still there, insistent. He studied the sensor panel. Readings fluttered. Airflow reports lagged. Something wasn't stable. He traced the line with his fingers. The fault wasn't catastrophic yet, but it could become exactly that if ignored. He told himself he'd get it fully fixed before the dinner crowd. That was the plan. Upstairs, the restaurant was already being set for lunch. Glass polished, napkins folded just right, staff gliding through the space in practiced patterns. Mayra paced near a corner booth, blazer crisp, jaw tight. Last night's embarrassment wasn't sitting the way she thought it would. Not the date. That she'd written off instantly. It was the silence that had followed, the way some people had glanced at her, not him, when she laughed. She told herself they were judging him. The heavy feeling in her chest suggested otherwise. She tried not to think about it. Her father had texted that morning. Charles Ellington didn't waste many words. Lunch. Discuss upcoming contract. Be ready. He wasn't known for tolerating frivolous behavior or pettiness. She didn't plan to mention the date. Downstairs, one of the art instructors waved Marcus over. "Can you help move a few tables? Crowd's growing." He nodded, shifting furniture easily, his presence steady and almost invisible, which suited him fine. Being indispensable without being seen had become its own strange comfort. He checked the entrance again. Still no sign of Amara. He leaned against a pillar, letting himself imagine her excited sprint into the room. "Didn't expect you back down here so fast," Brewster called, stepping off a service elevator. "Figured you'd still be checking that sensor upstairs." "The one near the restaurant?" Marcus asked. Brewster nodded. "Management called about fluctuations in that zone this morning. Might be nothing. Might be wiring. They want it cleared before prime time." Marcus's heartbeat didn't spike. It just shifted. Old instincts, old alertness, coming online. "I'll handle it," he said. "Didn't doubt it," Brewster replied, clapping his shoulder. Marcus headed toward Propo up the stairwell. As he climbed, he felt it. Air slightly warmer than it should be, moving just a bit too fast. Not dangerous yet. Not right either. Upstairs, Charles Ellington finally arrived at the restaurant entrance. His presence changed the temperature of a room without raising his voice. He shook the manager's hand, eyes scanning the space like it was a layout on a briefing screen instead of a lunch spot. "Dad," Mara said, standing quickly. "Mara," he answered, tone neutral but assessing. "You look distracted." "Just a long morning." He didn't argue, but he didn't buy it. Below them, the faulty sensor beeped again, the one Marcus had flagged in his mind, slightly faster now. Marcus opened the panel and watched the readings flicker, then locked onto the fault. Connection decay near an auxiliary line, minor, fixable, dangerous if ignored. He reached for his tools. Above, laughter burst from the restaurant, a bright, brittle sound he recognized instantly. Mara's laugh. He pushed the sound aside and focused on the wiring. One fix at a time, one problem at a time. His phone buzzed. Kids were arriving for the art event. Minutes later, a familiar voice cut through the atrium noise. "Dad!" He turned, and there she was, Amara, paint already on her fingers, deep brown eyes shining. She shot across the floor and launched herself into his arms. "Look," she said, holding up a fresh drawing, "a tall building with colorful windows. It's our mall, 'cause you keep it alive." His throat tightened. "I like that," he said, and meant it. Behind them, a thin ribbon of smoke slipped out of an upper kitchen vent. Too small to cause alarm, too easy to miss. Marcus didn't see it yet, but he would. And when he did, this would stop being the place where he'd been publicly laughed at and become the place where everyone learned exactly who they were really looking down on. Amara tugged his sleeve. "Come see where I put my picture." He let her pull him toward the tables, even as his senses sharpened. Something in the building's rhythm was off. The sensors, the airflow, the faint wrongness in the smell above the paint and crayons. The kitchen upstairs was tense. A junior cook had overheated a pan, flaring flames up toward the hood. The main vent caught most of it, but a little smoke escaped into the prep area. Staff waved at it, annoyed but not worried. They should have been. The aging emergency shutters, paired with a confused sensor reading, were a bad combination. A perfect storm, quietly building. Down in the atrium, Amara proudly showed him the glitter station. He knelt, giving her his attention even as his mind kept mapping heat and airflow. "Do you like it?" she asked, holding up a gold glitter star. "It's perfect," he said. Then he heard it, the same sensor beep from the corridor, only faster now, more insistent. His head snapped toward the side entrance. "Dad?" He crouched so he was eye level with her. "Stay with your instructor for a little bit, okay? I just need to check something." "Is it bad?" she whispered. "Not for you," he said, brushing a hand over her curls. "And I'll be right back." She nodded, trusting him completely. That trust weighed more than any gear he'd ever carried. Marcus slipped into the service corridor. The panel lights jittered, readings jumping between normal and almost alarm. The auxiliary line felt warmer under his fingers. His phone buzzed with a message from Brewster. "Any update on that sensor? Management wants clearance before dinner rush." "Still unstable," Marcus texted back, checking deeper. A faint shudder ran through the walls. The emergency shutter mechanisms clicked somewhere overhead, trying to decide whether to lock or reset. Not good. Upstairs, Charles paused mid-sentence, hearing something thud behind the wall. Mara kept talking, trying to steer him toward contract updates and away from anything personal. He only half listened. In the stairwell, Marcus smelled it before he saw it. Smoke, this time heavier, drifting downward instead of disappearing into the vents. He stepped toward the stairs, then stopped. Amara. She was still in the atrium. He turned and ran. He kept his voice calm when he reached her again, even as the first hint of haze curled along the ceiling. "Amara," he said, kneeling, "stay with your instructor. Do not leave this room. I'll come back. I promise." She looked scared, but she nodded, brave, trusting. He stood, eyes tracking the thicker smoke rolling out above the restaurant floor. The moment had arrived. The humiliation from last night was about to meet a crisis no amount of status or money could manage. He moved. Parents in the atrium began to murmur, some pointing upstairs. Security radios crackled. The building's polished calm fractured. Marcus slipped into the service stairwell, the narrow concrete throat between glossy public spaces and hidden machinery. Smoke clung to the upper half of the stairwell like a low cloud. He covered his mouth with his sleeve and took the steps 2 at a time, reading the heat and air the way he used to read wind on deployment. The malfunctioning sensor had confused the system. Alarms weren't triggering properly. Smoke was spreading, but evacuation protocols weren't catching up. At the top of the stairs, sound hit him first. Coughing, metal clanging. Someone yelling for the alarm to work. Another voice shouting that it wasn't. He pushed through the kitchen service door. The back corridor behind the restaurant was hazy. Not enough smoke to choke, but enough to disorient anyone who hadn't done this in worse conditions. He knew this corridor. He'd repaired vents here, replaced wiring behind that wall 2 months ago. He moved like he could see the floor plan in his head. In the kitchen, the flare-up on the stove was dying down, but smoke still hung heavy. The vent hood hadn't kicked in fully. A chef sat slumped by a prep table, hacking, eyes watering. 2 servers hovered uselessly. "Maintenance, do something," one shouted when she saw him. Marcus didn't waste time correcting her. He dropped to one knee, helped the chef upright, opened his airway, coached him through slower breaths. Then he looked toward the dining room. That was the real problem. He pushed through the swinging door. The restaurant was chaos. Guests coughed and staggered through a dim veil of smoke. Some stumbled toward the wrong exit. A mother cried out for her child. 2 older guests clung to each other, moving blindly. Mara stood near the center of the room, blazer over her mouth, eyes huge, frozen between 2 directions and choosing neither. Panic had locked her in place. Near her, Charles Ellington tried to direct traffic towards the main exit. He had presence, command, but the emergency shutter there had dropped halfway, jammed at knee height. People hesitated, afraid to crawl under in case it slammed. Marcus took in everything in a single sweep. Main exit blocked. Kitchen exit open but chaotic. Ventilation half dead. Fire suppression dormant. Shutters glitching. Crowd panicking. No time. He moved straight to the emergency panel by the stuck shutter. Hands already going to the manual override most people never bothered to learn. "Hey," Charles called. "You, don't touch that. It's unstable." "If I don't," Marcus said without looking up, "it's going to lock." Charles stopped. The calm in his voice wasn't bravado. It was experience. "You know the system?" Charles asked, breath tight. "Better than anyone up here," Marcus answered, fingers flying. He coaxed the shutter up inch by inch, enough for people to slide under safely. Charles dropped to one knee and guided 2 elderly diners through first. Others followed, staying low, covering their mouths with napkins. Marcus didn't shout instructions. He projected them, voice firm, measured. "Stay down, don't run, move together, keep your mouths covered." People listened. Mara stared at him, stunned. The man she'd walked away from last night like he was beneath her now moved through smoke like he'd been born in it. He crossed the room again, popped a wall register open, and manually redirected airflow to an auxiliary duct. The vents coughed, sputtered, and finally pulled, starting to suck the smoke upward. Not perfect. Enough. Charles watched him with something new behind his gaze. Recognition. Not of a uniform, of training, of someone who'd led others through real danger. Not just a busy lunch rush. "Who are you?" Charles asked, voice low. Marcus didn't answer. There were still people to get out. He scooped up a crying child from under a table, placed the boy in his mother's arms, and steered them toward the exit. His motions were efficient, smooth, no wasted energy. The restaurant was clearing. Panic was shrinking. People moved where he pointed without arguing. The reversal had begun. Not by some grand speech, by competence. For Mara, the realization hit like cold water. The man she'd mocked from across a linen-covered table was the man everyone now depended on. Not by a little, by entirely. He wasn't done. In the far corner, a server knelt by an older man slumped in his chair. Marcus crossed the room, checked the man's airway, tilted his head for better airflow, listened to his breathing. Smoke inhalation, disorientation, panic. He'd seen this before, in places where sirens didn't come as fast. "We're getting him outside," Marcus said. He lifted the man carefully, weight distributed the way he'd learned carrying people who couldn't walk on their own. The server followed, one hand on the man's shoulder, the other covering her mouth. At the exit, Marcus positioned the man where the incoming responders could reach him. Then he turned back into the room again. "The main floor is almost clear," Charles said, appearing at his side. Soot streaked his expensive suit, but he didn't seem to care. "What about the shutters? Can they drop again?" "They'll hold," Marcus said, eyeing the panel, "as long as the system stabilizes. Smoke's confusing it. Kitchen's still the weak point." He headed back through the swinging door. The kitchen was a mess. Pots on the floor, ingredients scattered, smoke hanging thick around the overheated pan that caused the flare. One of the vents clicked on and off uselessly. Marcus grabbed a fire-resistant cloth, shut off the stove, then pried open the same wall panel he'd examined earlier. Behind it, insulation had slipped, exposing a section of wire to heat. The sensor wasn't lying, it was overwhelmed. He secured the insulation, steadied the wiring, and listened for the system's response. 3 sharp beeps, then silence. The vents roared to life. Smoke began to lift in steady columns. He exhaled. The immediate danger was over. Now, everyone else needed to know that. When he stepped back into the dining room, the haze was thinning. Guests were low but calmer. Mara helped a couple stand. Charles directed last stragglers toward the exit, treating Marcus not as staff but as an equal. He walked straight toward Marcus. "The system just stabilized," Charles said. "That was you." Marcus gave a small nod. For a second, Charles just studied him. Then his posture shifted, something subtle but heavy with meaning. "Where'd you learn to move like that?" he asked quietly. "Old training," Marcus said. "What kind of training?" Charles pressed, though his eyes said he already had a good idea. Marcus didn't answer. Silence said enough. Across the room, Mara caught sight of the 2 men standing side by side. Her father, a man whose judgment professionals relied on, and the black maintenance worker she'd dismissed like he was nothing, sharing a wordless understanding she didn't have access to. Her stomach dropped. He left the restaurant quickly, not to escape praise, but because the only person whose fear mattered to him was downstairs, Amara. As he descended the stairwell, adrenaline started to drain from his muscles, leaving behind a familiar ache. He'd kept people alive. Again. Different context, same instinct. When he stepped back into the bright atrium, the contrast rattled him. Up there, smoke, panic, systems on the edge of failure. Down here, kids laughing, parents wiping glitter off shirts, staff trying to keep things normal. And there, by the art table, stand Amara, hands clasped, eyes searching, her dark curls frizzing around her face. Deep brown skin, a little pale with worry. She spotted him. "Dad!" He knelt right as she collided with him, lifting her onto his hip. Her little hands cupped his face, checking like she was the parent. "You're okay?" she whispered. "I'm okay," he murmured. "Everything's under control now." She buried her face into his shoulder and held on. The world blurred around them. For a few seconds, nothing existed but her heartbeat and the solid truth of her in his arms. Above them, the last strands of smoke curled from vents. Below, something else was forming, a story, a reversal, built not from rumor but from witnesses. After a moment, he eased her down gently, keeping one hand on her shoulder. "Everyone said something was happening upstairs," she said, eyes wide. "There was a little trouble," he replied carefully, "but it's taken care of." She nodded, trusting him completely. He walked her back to the art table, making sure she was safe, then stepped away as the mall's security team rushed towards the stairs, listening to their radios crackle with delayed information about a crisis that was already being cleaned up. One of the guards glanced at Marcus in a way that said he wasn't sure whether to give directions or ask for them. Marcus ignored it. The job was done. He had no interest in being the center or anything, but the center had already shifted. Whispers traveled with him as he crossed the floor. A mother pointed him out to a friend. "He's the one who got us out." A bakery clerk stared openly, saying, "That's him," under her breath. Recognition made him uneasy. Not out of guilt, but history. In another world, attention had come with consequences. He checked on Amara one last time, watching her settle back into painting, then turned away, and walked right into a pair of eyes already locked onto him. Mara. She stood near the staircase railing, smoke smudges on her cheek. Blazer wrinkled from kneeling on the floor. Her confidence was gone, replaced by something raw and unsettled. Every unspoken thing sat there in her gaze. The sharp memory of her own laughter, the shock of watching him own the crisis she'd been helpless in, and the tightening realization that she had completely misjudged him. She took a step forward as if to speak. He turned to leave. He didn't owe her anything, not a moment, not an explanation. But fate wasn't done throwing them into the same frame. "Excuse me," a firm voice said behind him. Marcus stopped. Charles Ellington walked toward them, his presence pulling the air tighter. People parted instinctively. His smoke-marked suit did nothing to dull his authority. He took in the atrium, the children's tables, the staff, security, the man who just saved half the building, and stopped in front of Marcus. "We weren't properly introduced," Charles said. "Staff tell me you cleared the kitchen, stabilized the vent system, and manually corrected the emergency shutters." Marcus nodded once. "It needed to be done." "That's not what I mean," Charles replied, voice quieter. "Lots of people try to do what needs to be done. Very few do it with the level of precision you showed." He stepped closer so their conversation stayed mostly private, though the room still leaned in. "What unit were you with?" he asked. Marcus's silence was not confusion. It was choice. "That chapter's closed," he said. Charles studied him, posture, breathing, the faint military habit in the way his feet planted, shoulders aligned. Respect settled over his features. "I know what I saw upstairs," he said, "and I know what kind of man moves like that." Mara drifted closer, voice barely there. "Dad, this is..." Charles lifted a hand, eyes still on Marcus. "Your daughter is lucky," he said quietly, "to have a father like you." "And this building is lucky you were here today?" Something shifted in Marcus's chest. Not pride. Being seen clearly after months of being overlooked always came with risk attached. He considered walking away, letting the moment pass. But the atrium had already started to gather around them. The lead firefighter from upstairs stepped off the elevator, soot on her gear. She walked straight toward Marcus. "We finished the sweep," she said. "Kitchen secure, ventilation stable. Staff say you rerouted airflow manually." "Yeah," Marcus answered. "Sensor was spiking." "Most people wouldn't know how," she said, eyebrows lifting. "Most people aren't responsible for keeping a room full of kids safe underneath," he replied simply. A second firefighter stepped up. "We've filed a report with management. They'll need your statement on the malfunction." "I'll write it up," Marcus said. The firefighters moved away to talk to security, but the crowd didn't thin. If anything, more people were drifting closer, pretending to straighten chairs or wipe paint while they listened. Charles's mouth twitched. "You don't like attention," he observed. "Never needed it," Marcus replied. That answer landed with weight. "You've led men before," Charles said. "Real teams, real missions." Marcus didn't confirm or deny it. He didn't have to. Brewster appeared from a side hallway, red-faced. "Ward, I've been looking everywhere, man. They told me what happened." He stopped when he saw Charles. "Mr. Ellington," Brewster stammered, "didn't expect to, see you down here?" Charles nodded a greeting, but didn't break eye contact with Marcus. "This man kept your restaurant from turning into a disaster site," he said. Brewster swallowed. "Yeah, he's good at what he does." "He's more than good," Charles said. "He's trained." Before Brewster could answer, a server from upstairs stepped forward, still coughing lightly. "Sir," she said to Marcus, hands trembling, "I just wanted to say thank you. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know where to go. You told me to stay low and got me out. Thank you." "I'm glad you're okay," Marcus said. Her gratitude cracked something open. Others followed. A guest who'd been stuck near the booths. A father who'd been trying to shield his toddler. Another server who'd watched him lift an older man out of the smoke. One by one, they came with variations of the same message. "You kept us calm. You knew exactly what to do. You saved us." The reversal, once just a possibility, was now happening out loud. Mara stepped in, voice shaking. "I didn't understand who you were," she said. "Last night, I didn't know anything." He met her eyes. "You didn't ask." The simplicity cut deeper than any shout. Her eyes filled, not for show, but because the truth hurt. "My daughter misjudged you," Charles said, glancing at her. "Most of us did." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Across the cluster of people, someone finally noticed something else. The faint tattoo peeking from under the cuff of Marcus's navy uniform, the edge of an old insignia he rarely let show. Charles's gaze dropped to it. His breath left him in a low exhale. "That mark," he said. "It's real, isn't it?" Marcus didn't cover it. He didn't confirm it either. He didn't have to. Charles drew in a slow breath, shoulders straightening, eyes sharpening with understanding that went deeper than job titles. For a heartbeat, the atrium went still. Children sensed it and quieted. Parents paused mid-sentence. Staff stopped pretending to tidy things that were already clean. Then Charles Ellington, federal security advisor, decorated strategist, the man people in suits tried to impress, shifted his feet together, lifted his chin, and raised his hand to his brow. The salute was crisp, precise, unquestionable. The kind of salute given only to someone who had earned it the hardest way. A collective gasp rippled through the atrium. Marcus didn't return it. He didn't need to. The way he held himself, still, grounded, unflinching, said enough. Respect offered. Respect silently acknowledged. Mara brought her hand to her mouth. Last night's memory slammed into her, the way she'd laughed, loud and cruel, at a man in a maintenance uniform. Today, that same man was being publicly honored by the person whose judgment she trusted most. "Earlier today," Charles said, lowering his hand but not his tone, "this man prevented a tragedy. He led with a level of training most people here can't imagine. What you saw upstairs was not luck. It wasn't good instincts. It was skill. It was service." People nodded without realizing they were doing it. A server whispered, "I knew he wasn't just maintenance." A father holding his toddler murmured, "He saved us." Even kids, still gripping paintbrushes, went quiet. "I didn't know who you were," Mara said again, softer. "I judged you by your uniform. I judged you by what I assumed your life looked like. I was wrong. I'm sorry." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she added quickly. "I just needed to say that to your face." Marcus inclined his head once. Not warmth, not hostility, acknowledgement. "That's enough," he said. Tears slipped down her cheeks. For once they weren't for sympathy. They were the cost of seeing herself clearly. He turned away from the circle forming around him and focused on the only person who mattered. Amara watched from the art table, eyes huge. She ran to him again, throwing her arms around his waist. "Dad," she whispered, "everyone's talking about you." "They'll forget," he said quietly. "No, they won't," she insisted, with the simple certainty of a child who had just watched the whole building redefine her father. He kissed the top of her head, deep brown cheek pressed against her own rich brown skin, and scanned the room one last time, making sure she was far from any lingering danger. Across the atrium, Charles still watched. Not with curiosity now, but with the recognition of a man who knew exactly what sort of soldier had just walked back into civilian life. The shift was complete. People who had never looked at Marcus twice now understood exactly what kind of man truly had value. But the day wasn't done with him yet. He adjusted his grip on Amara and started towards the exit. The building slowly returned to normal, alarms silenced, staff cleaning, security directing stragglers, but conversation kept circling back to him. Hot water system glitch on Tuesday, that guy fixed it. Weird sensor issue last month, he handled it. Now they saw the pattern. Outside, sunlight poured through the glass as he stepped into the concourse that led to the parking lot. Amara's head rested on his shoulder. "Can we get ice cream?" she asked, voice small with the crash that follows adrenaline. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "Yeah," he said. "I think we earned that today." He moved toward the doors. Footsteps followed. "Ward," Charles called out. Marcus paused. Amara lifted her head. "I don't want to intrude," Charles said, catching up, suit still marked with smoke. I just don't like leaving things unfinished. He looked at Amara first. Young lady, he said, a hint of a smile softening his stern features. Your father is one of the bravest men I've ever seen. She blinked, shy and proud at the same time. I know, she said. Something in Charles's expression warmed at that answer. Then he turned to Marcus. I meant what I said in there, he continued. If you ever want another path, federal response, crisis training, private protection, you call me. I will open every door I can. I appreciate it, Marcus said, but I've got everything I need right here. He glanced at Amara. She squeezed his hand tighter. She's my only mission now. Admiration flickered across Charles's face. Then she's luckier than most, he said. Mara stepped up beside her father, hands twisted together. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said. I just want you to know I learned something today, something I should have known last night. She swallowed. I judged you because you didn't fit the picture in my head. I was wrong, and I'm truly sorry. He listened, really listened, then gave a small nod. That's enough, he repeated, same calm tone as before. Relief and regret washed over her at once. Charles added quietly, I've met a lot of men in uniform. Not all of them keep their integrity once the uniform comes off. You did. When nobody was watching. When people underestimated you. When someone laughed in your face and you still chose the high road. He paused. You're the kind of man I'd trust in any room, in any crisis. And the kind I'm proud my daughter crossed paths with, even if she didn't deserve the lesson. Mara flinched slightly but didn't argue. Marcus shifted Amara's weight on his hip. I don't need anyone's trust, he said. I just need to raise my daughter right. You're doing exactly that, Charles replied. Silence settled between them, heavy but respectful. Amara lifted her small hand and waved. Bye, she said. Charles and Mara both waved back. Marcus carried his daughter toward a small ice cream cart outside. She picked her favorite flavor, concentrating hard not to drip on his uniform. He paid, thanked the vendor, and walked her to the car. Dad, she asked between careful licks, were you scared up there? He thought it over. I wasn't scared of what was happening, he answered. I was only scared of not getting back to you. Her eyes softened in that way only kids' eyes can when they finally understand something big with their whole heart. She reached out and squeezed his hand. At the car, he helped her climb in, buckled her seatbelt, then leaned against the cool metal for a moment, letting the day settle. The humiliation from the blind date felt distant now, like it belonged to another lifetime. What mattered was what the crisis had revealed, not what Mara's laughter had tried to say. He got behind the wheel. Amara hummed softly beside him, swinging her legs. They pulled out of the lot, leaving behind a building full of people who would never look at the black maintenance guy the same way again, not as the punchline of someone else's story, as the man whose calm had held their lives together when everything else started to come apart. At a red light, he checked the rearview mirror. Amara met his eyes. You're my hero, she said quietly. He smiled, small and real. I'm just your dad, he replied, and that's enough. The light turned green. He drove forward. And the story that started with public humiliation ended with something much stronger. Revelation, respect, and the quiet, unshakable dignity of a black single dad who never needed applause to know his own worth. If this story hit you in the heart, make sure you like the video and subscribe so you don't miss more stories about real justice, real dignity, and the quiet heroes walking around us every day.